Professor, I have a question. You're muted. I can't hear you.
Just a minute. Let me set up, okay?
Okay.
Just one sec. Chat. There we go. No participants. Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, so I was a little
I'm going
concerned.
to answer the questions for the exam at the end of class, okay? But ask yours, please.
Okay, it's not regarding the exam. It's
Okay.
about Brightspace. It seems that all the notes, the recordings, the slides, all of them are completely gone. Was that intentional? And if so,
Yes.
why?
Yes, because the first part is finished, right? So why would you want?
Is the final exam
No,
cumulative?
no.
Oh, okay, I see. All
No.
right. Thank you.
But
Oh,
did you
yeah.
want it for any reason?
No, I just thought that maybe we would need it sometime throughout the course, but I guess not.
No, some the students that have any makeup, they will need it, but not right now.
Professor, is there any way you could put the notes for this before the
I did.
before class?
For today's class, I just post them.
Oh, okay.
But I will try to post them with more time. But today it was a little tough, a lot of things to do. But they are posted now. You have the slides are posted. Okay? So I will discuss the exam at the end of class, and I will go over the questions just to make sure we review them. Probably it will go over the recording, the class, but since it's being recorded, then you can listen to it. Okay, so what are we going to do today? We're going to start with the skeletal system. And here it is. It's appropriate because we're almost at Halloween. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, so sorry to interrupt. The slides for today, I don't see them. I don't know
Well, they are posted there. So,
I'm not able to see them either.
Me neither.
okay, let me check. 1 second. Give me a minute. Okay, give me a minute. I'm going to check. Because I think I made them available. But, right space, here we are. And here we are. And content. Oh, I know. Oh, I see what I did. Let's see. Okay, let's see if you can see them now. Can you see them now? Can someone try?
Yes, we can see them now.
Okay, great. I forgot to click on some. Okay, so today we're going to study the bone. And as I said, it's very appropriate because we're close to Halloween. It would be a good lecture for kids. Okay, so here you have all the bones, and we should be thankful that we have all these bones. You know that we have an endoskeleton. Lobsters and mollusks and so on, they have an exoskeleton. Every time they grow, they have to shed the shells. So I'm sure you've heard about soft shell crabs, which you harvest them.
Black Girl focus on your product and refuse to compromise.
To Black Girl New York City Diaries. Today is going to be a day in my life.
Okay. So for us, the bones just grow and we will see what is the procedure, the process that allows our bones to grow. So in our body, we have around 206 bones. You'll have to learn them, all of them. and they have different functions as we will go through. So here's the skeleton with the bones, and you see that the material that the bones are made out of is very special because you don't want them to be very hard like china, on plates that they fall on the floor and they break. So they have some kind of elasticity that allows them to be strong, but not to break all the time unless there's a very, very strong fall or stress applied to them. Okay, so what are the functions of the bones? Some of them are very obvious. So they support the soft tissue. And you think about the brain inside our skull, that's very, very soft. You're going to dissect the sheep brain in the last part of the semester, and you will see how soft the brain tissue is. And it's very important for life. So it is encased in this cranium that's very, very hard and protects the bone. And you also think about the lungs. Those are very, very soft tissue, and they're protected by the rib cage. So you see that the bones, the shape of the bones have different shapes, and one of their functions is to protect the soft tissues. They also protect the injury of internal organs, such as I referred to, the brain and the lungs, etc. Now, they provide a very strong leverage for the muscles to be able to move. So the muscles attached to the bone, and these are the bones and muscles work together to provide movement. And how are the muscles attached to the bones? They're attached by this connective tissue that is specialized, and it's called to form tendons. But the bones are also connected to each other. You see that the bones are not just floating around in the body, the bones are connected to each other by ligaments. It's also connective tissue. And one important thing to remember is that the ligaments don't have a blood supply. So they don't regenerate. So you hear all the time basketball players, football players, that they rupture ligaments, especially in the knee. And those ligaments have to be replaced by other ligaments because they cannot regenerate because they don't have blood supply. Now, another very, very important function of the bone, the skeletal system, is homeostasis of minerals, especially of calcium. So the bone is a very important storage. One of its functions is to store calcium. So when the calcium levels are low in the blood, then we have these cells that are known as osteoclasts. These are monster cells, enormous, have many, many nuclei, and their function is to chew bone tissue to release calcium. And that mechanism allows the blood levels of calcium, or the calcium blood levels, to go up. And so it's highly regulated calcium levels in the blood. So if there's too much calcium in the blood, what happens is these other bone cells that are known as osteoblasts, they deposit calcium in the bone. So you have these two cells that are part of the bone tissue that are known osteoblasts and osteoclasts. Some chew up the bone to release calcium. The other ones deposit calcium on the bone. And this is also the principle by which bone grows. It depends on the work of these two types of cells, osteoblasts and osteoclasts. Then another important function of the skeletal system is to produce blood cells. This process is known as hemopoiesis. So hemopoiesis, don't confuse it with other processes. What do I want to talk? To maintain homeostasis, right? Don't confuse homeostasis. Oh, here's homeostasis, but don't confuse homeostasis with hemopoiesis. Homeostasis is to maintain the levels of certain parameters like temperature or minerals or carbon dioxide levels and so on under a normal condition, a healthy condition. Hemopoiesis is a different process, is the process of by which the blood cells develop from precursors. Those precursors of the blood cells are stored in the spongy bone in these cavities that are formed by trabecula in the spongy bone. So spongy bone, if you remember, it looks like a sponge. It has these openings that are surrounded by bone tissue, and these are called trabecula that form these spaces. And it's within these spaces that the bone, the blood cell precursors are stored. Okay, now hemopoiesis is not just the development of red blood cells. So the red bone marrow is stored in the bone, but because it's red, it does not only give rise to red blood cells, it gives rise to all types of cells that are located in the blood, that flow in the blood. So we have 1 billion white blood cells, 200 billion, so 200 times more red blood cells. And you know that these are the ones that carry oxygen and carbon dioxide. And we have 100 billion platelets. Remember that platelets are important to prevent blood hemorrhage when the blood vessels are damaged. They form the clots. Okay, so all these cells, white blood cells, red blood cells, and platelets, come from precursors that make up the red bone marrow. Now, because we call it red, it's because it's gives rise to blood cells, but not only to red blood cells, to white blood cells and platelets also. So the bone marrow is stored in the spaces located in the bone, in the spongy bone. So that's known as the bone marrow. The bone marrow, the red bone marrow, contains the precursors of all these cells. And it's this type of bone marrow that is sometimes transplanted into individuals that have cancer of blood cells, like white blood cells or so. And then the bone, the skeletal system, is also used for energy storage. So how? In the yellow bone marrow. This yellow bone marrow is stored in the medullary cavity of these long bones that are hollow inside and store this yellow bone marrow. And it's called yellow because it's made up of adipocytes. You know what adipocytes are? They are cells filled with lipids, with fat. So you have these two types of bone marrow that are stored in the skeletal system. When I'm looking here, I'm trying to allow students to come in. Okay, so we have two types of bone marrow. The red bone marrow that is stored in these spaces in the spongy bone, and this bone marrow, the red bone marrow, gives rise to all types of cells that are located within the blood. The yellow bone marrow that is stored in the medullary cavity of these long bones has adipocytes, so it's a storage of energy. Because remember, the fat can be used by mitochondria to produce ATP. Okay, so we have different types of bones. Now think about if you close our eyes and look at all the different shapes of bones in our body and how they all end up in the specific site, because you wouldn't want to have a long bone marrow in the spinal cord. And you wouldn't want to have the patella bone or sesamoid bone in the leg or in the arm. So all these bones are formed in their specific sites. Oh, we have questions here. I'm sorry, I haven't been looking. Okay, we have the notes. And now we get to the questions. So hematopoiesis and hemopoiesis is the same. Yes, hematopoiesis or hemopoiesis is the same. And remember this hormone, erythropoietin, that is produced by the kidney, and it acts at the bone marrow to induce the differentiation of red blood cells from the bone marrow. So hemopoiesis or hematopoiesis are the same, but don't confuse them with homeostasis. What the difference of hemopoiesis and hematopoiesis? They're the same. What is the difference? Okay. So red bone marrow is in all bones, and yellow bone marrow is only in long bones. Red bone marrow is located in the spongy bone. Where is the bone marrow in the bone? The spongy bone. We will see this in a minute. Okay. So here are the different, we classify the bones. So remember, we have 260 bones, and we can classify them based on their shape. You have long bones, short bones, irregular bones. Look at the design, the architecture of this irregular bone. That's a vertebra. And inside this space, that's where the spinal cord goes through, right here. Then you have flat bones and sesamoid bones. So all different types of shapes, and they have to end up in the right place. Okay, now the structure. Now you will understand what is spongy bone and compact bone. So the spongy bone, you see it here with the trabecula, these like branch-like structures, and they form these spaces. And these spaces are where the red bone marrow is stored. You see here, I mean, this is an amazing architecture. So we have here the spongy bone that has a structure, a shape that allows for the red bone marrow to be stored. So it's very well protected because it's located within these spaces in the spongy bone. Then around the spongy bone, you see the compact bone. There is no trabecular here. And here is the medullary cavity where the yellow bone marrow is stored. So here's where the red bone marrow would be stored, and inside this is a cross section. If you would cut the femur, for example, a cross section, you would see the compact bone on the outside, then a layer of spongy bone, and in the middle, this cavity that is known as the medullary cavity stores the yellow marrow. Actually, if I would be drawing this, I would have made this yellow so that it's not confusing with the red bone marrow that is stored in the spongy bone. Okay. So you see that the compact bone, the one that doesn't have branches and it's compact, as its name indicates, is 75% of all the bone. The spongy bone is 25%. So you have 3 times the amount of compact bone compared to spongy bone. So the yellow bone marrow is in the central canal of the bone. Exactly. It's called the medullary cavity. Okay, so here you have histological preparations of the 2 types of bone. So here, you can see it's a section, histological section of the spongy bone. And you see here the trabecula. And inside you see the red bone marrow. And you cannot really see, but you see some cells inside that are the precursors of blood cells. Not only red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets are stored in these spaces within the spongy bone. And now here you see the compact bone that does not have these spaces. So it's compact. All of it is filled up with bone matrix and the different types of cells, osteocytes and so on. Okay, this is another view of the two types of bone. So here you see the femur, and here's the cavity, the medullary cavity that contains yellow bone marrow. And here's the trabecula. So here in the head of the femur, you see that it has the spongy bone with the trabecula, and these spaces are where the red bone marrow is stored. Okay, so here, this is just a cartoon showing the red bone marrow with all different cells. You see white blood cells here, you see red blood cells. The red blood cells here still have a nucleus, so they're not yet fully developed. But you have your xenophils and monocytes and so on. So erythrocyte means red blood cells. So you have all different types of blood cells stored in these spaces. And here you see the yellow bone marrow stored in the medullary cavity. Okay, so now let's look at the different parts of a bone. Here we have a long bone. And what are the different structures within a bone? So first of all, we divide the bone into two major structures. The epiphysis on each end of the bone, so the upper and the lower end of the bone, and in between is the diaphysis. So epiphysis and diaphysis. Now, the area where the epiphysis joins the diaphysis is known as metaphysis. You see that there are two metaphyses. And why are these important? This area is very important because it contains the epiphyseal plate. So the epiphyseal plate, is the area that allows the bones to grow in length. So the epiphyseal, the metaphysis contains bone cells that divide by mitosis. So it allows this bone to increase in length. So the metaphysis is where the epiphyseal plate is located. And the epiphyseal plate at a certain point will be totally calcified. That means it no longer has cells that undergo mitosis. And when it reaches that point, the bone cannot increase in length. That's it. It has reached its maximum length. So the growth of the bone depends on this metaphysis. Okay, so you have, oh, sorry about that. Okay, so you have the epiphysis, two epiphyses, one on each side, and the diaphysis in the middle. Okay, now let's look at what is protecting the bone. So what is protecting the bone are these connective tissue layers. So the epiphysis has a layer of connective tissue or cartilage, that's a connective tissue, that's specific cartilage, and it's known as the articular cartilage. And this is a very, very important protection of the bone. So it protects the epiphysis. Now think about that this epiphysis is going to connect to another bone. And you don't want the bones to be rubbing against each other. That would be extremely painful. So the bones are protected by this cartilage known as the articular cartilage that is located and protects the epiphysis. So this cartilage, because when we move around and run around and so on, this articular cartilage is subjected to a lot of stress and becomes damaged, and that leads to arthritis. Would articular cartilage and hyaline cartilage be the same? No, they're different. Hyaline cartilage is what gives rise to some type of bone, which we will discuss soon. So this articular cartilage is located specifically around the epiphysis and prevents the bone tissue, the bones, from rubbing against each other. So it's very important to maintain this in an optimal condition. And remember that cartilage has no blood vessels. So it has to get the nutrients from blood vessels in other parts of the bone. So articular cartilage is what protects the epiphysis. Then you have another type of connective tissue that is known as periosteum, and the periosteum protects the diaphysis. So you see here the periosteum is on the outside of the diaphysis, and this is where the ligaments and tendons are attached to. So the periosteum. And then inside, so this is the medullary cavity. Inside the medullary cavity, you have another layer of connective tissue that makes up the endosteum. Now you will see what the hyaline connective tissue leads to, or cartilage leads to. Just wait a minute, okay? So you have the articular cartilage around the epiphysis. Then you have the periosteum that protects the outside of the diaphysis. This is where the tendons and ligaments are attached to. And then inside, protecting the medullary cavity, is the endosteum. Okay, so inside the diaphysis, there's this cavity known as medullary cavity, and this is where the yellow bone marrow is stored. The yellow bone marrow is made up of adipocytes that are cells containing lots of fat, of lipids. Okay, now here I'm showing an articulation. An articulation is very important. It allows the bones to move. Here's the elbow articulation, the shoulder articulation, the knee articulation. So these articulations are present when there's two bones that move. Okay, now these articulations, some are very complex, but here's one that's less complex. And you see here in gray, this is the articular cartilage. You see that is at the end of the epiphysis of these two bones. This is the articular cartilage that makes the two bones close to each other and protects them from damage. Are the epiphysis, diaphysis, and metaphysis found in all bones, mostly in long bones. Okay, so this articulation has other components. So you see the muscle and the tendon that's going to be bound to the periosteum. But this slide is mostly to show the articular cartilage that is protecting the epiphysis of the bone. And you see here that there's a capsule that's filled with synovial fluid, but we will talk more about this when we cover articulations. So this slide is mostly to show you the importance of the articular cartilage. What is attached to the periosteum are the tendons and the ligaments. Okay, so here you have a closer look to the periosteum. So you see here the periosteum. This is compact bone, and you see the osteocytes that are trapped within the matrix of this compact bone. So the compact bone has osteocytes, the cells, and the matrix is it's made up of highly concentrated calcium salts. And here you see the periosteum. And it has some cells that are osteogenic cells. So what are osteogenic cells? These osteogenic cells are cells that can undergo mitosis and give rise to osteoblasts. And we will go through this process in detail in a little bit. So what is in the periosteum? You have the connective tissue. It has osteogenic cells or osteogenic cells. And you see that this is where the tendons and ligaments attach to. And you see that it's protecting the compact bone made up of matrix and the osteocytes. Now here's a cross section of here the femur, and it shows compact bone. Remember, this is compact bone. And then we have spongy bone, and in the middle, the medullary cavity. So in the middle, you see here in the high magnification, you see the endosteum. So the endosteum is also made up of osteogenic cells. So what are osteogenic cells? Just like I told you, these cells undergo mitosis and they can give rise to osteoblasts. And if you remember, the osteoblasts are the architects of the bone. They deposit calcium on the bone. So they increase bone density. So if a bone is very, very strong, that means it has lots of calcium, and that means that it has active osteoblasts. So if you think about a tennis player that, for example, is right-handed, the bones on the arm of a right-handed tennis player have more calcium. They have a higher density than the left-handed. Why? Because stress activates the osteoblasts and makes them deposit calcium. So they make this blue material that's called osteoid, and it's going to give rise to the bone matrix. So the osteoblasts, you see how they are nicely organized here in a row. They produce osteoid that is highly rich in calcium, and it's going to be differentiated into bone matrix. Osteoclasts are the ones, no, they don't form bone. They destroy bone to release calcium. So osteoclasts, the function of the osteoclast is opposite to osteoblasts. So the difference is the B and the C. Osteoblasts, they deposit calcium on the bone. Osteoclasts, they remove calcium. Okay, so now let's concentrate on the osteoblasts. How are they formed? So they're formed from osteogenic cells. Remember, we talked about osteogenic cells being present in the endosteum and in the periosteum. So osteogenic cells, they are derived from stem cells mesenchyma. Mesenchyma, that is, those are the precursors of osteogenic cells. And you see here osteogenic cells, and they still can undergo mitosis. So they give rise to osteoblasts. Remember, I showed you the osteoblasts here in the endosteum. So here you have the osteoblasts, and they produce this matrix that is known as osteoid, that is highly enriched in calcium, and that is going to differentiate into matrix. Okay, so now you have the osteoblasts. That is soft matrix, it's still soft. And the osteoblasts are going to differentiate into osteocytes. So osteocytes these cells make up 90 to 95% of the bone cells. They're osteocytes. And they are trapped. They are trapped in the matrix. You see, and they have these projections that are used to maintain the bone matrix. So you go from this transition from osteogenic cells that can undergo mitosis to osteoblasts that generate the osteoid of soft matrix, and then the final step are the osteocytes. So the matrix, let's say, is the ocean where the osteoids and the osteocytes are trapped. So it's the matrix. Let's say it could be considered the interstitial space, right? So the matrix is made up of calcium enriched salts. So this is where the osteocytes are lodged. Right. It's the space where the osteocytes are located and trapped in this matrix that is made up of calcium salts.
Is
And
the calcium salts the osteoid?
well, the osteoid is still soft, right? It's still not differentiated into this matrix that is hard but tensile. And I will describe what the matrix, bone matrix is in a minute. Do the osteoblasts become osteocytes? Yes. So the osteoblasts differentiate into osteocytes. And here you have again another histological preparation showing the osteoblasts. You see here a nice row of osteoblasts. And here's compact bone, and you see the osteocytes. You see these cells that are trapped in this bone matrix, all here, represented in pink without these nuclei. Okay, now let's see how are osteoclasts formed. So here we have osteoblasts. They come from osteogenic cells that are part of the mesenchyma, derived from mesenchyma. Are osteocytes always trapped in matrix? Yes. Okay, so now let's focus on the osteoclasts. Now here are the two types of bone cells, osteoblast and osteoclast. And they are derived from different precursors. So the osteoblasts are derived from osteogenic cells or osteogenic cells that differentiate into osteoblasts, and from osteoblasts, they differentiate in osteocytes that are then trapped in the matrix. Now, the osteoclasts are derived not from osteogenic cells, they are derived from a type of white blood cells, monocytes. So bone marrow stem cells, monocytes, they fuse together to give rise to osteoclast. So you see that the osteoclast is a huge cell, gigantic. It has many nuclei because it derives from the fusion of different monocytes. So the monocytes fuse together and give rise to osteoclasts. And you see that they have this ruffled border. Why? They are filled with lysosomes. Remember what lysosomes are. These are the organelles that have enzymes, hydrolases. So they have enzymes that can chew up the bone matrix to release calcium. So forget and remember that the osteoclasts, the origin of osteoclasts are white blood cells, monocytes, that fuse together to form the osteoclast. And these osteoclasts are gigantic cells that have this ruffled border to increase the contact of the cell with the bone matrix. And they release enzymes that are stored in the lysosomes and are used to chew up the matrix to release calcium. So the lysosomes destroyed, no, in this case, we're not saying that lysosomes destroy old ruptured cells. No, lysosomes are inside the cells. It's the white blood cells that destroy damaged cells. Here, lysosomes are organelles that release the enzymes that are used to release calcium from the matrix. Okay, so here you have another histological preparation that compares the size of an osteoclast with an osteoblast. You see the comparison in size and also in the nuclear material. So the nucleus of these cells is stained in purple, dark pink. Here's an osteoblast with its nucleus. Here's an osteoclast with many nuclei. And you see here a drawing of an osteoclast with many nuclei. And here's an osteoblast. Each cell, each osteoblast has one nucleus. And here is the osteocyte that is derived from an osteoblast and is trapped in the matrix. Okay, now we reach the bone matrix. So what is the bone matrix? The bone matrix derives from the osteoid. Remember we talked about the osteoid, which is the soft matrix, here represented in blue. So this is still soft. When it's enriched in calcium, then it becomes calcified or mineralized. And this is where the osteocytes are trapped. So what is the bone matrix made up? It's made up, one of its components is this salt that is highly enriched in calcium. So it's a hydroxyapatite. So this salt, hydroxyapatite, is highly enriched in calcium. But if the matrix would just be made up of calcium, it would be very brittle. It would break very easily. But to give some kind of elasticity or what we call tensile strength, it has collagen fibers. So here are the collagen fibers that are arranged in a parallel manner, and they are part of the bone matrix. So the bone matrix has calcium salts that gives it its strength, and then it has collagen fibers to make it sort of a little bit of elasticity, so that if there's some stress applied to the bone, it doesn't break right away. The stress has to be very, very strong to have a fracture. So I wanted to confirm one way to tell the cells apart. Osteoclasts have many nuclei, while osteoblasts have few. Yes, that is correct. Osteoblasts have only one nucleus. You see, here's an osteoblast with its nucleus. The osteoclasts have many nuclei. So these two cells that I was describing, the osteoblasts and the osteoclasts, work together to lead to bone metabolism. So you want to make more bone when it's necessary, but you want also to destroy some bone when it's necessary, especially to shape the bone. Remember one of the first slides, I showed you the bones have different kinds of shapes. So the osteoblasts and the osteoclasts work together. It's like sculpturing, making a statue. You add a little bit here of clay and take it out a little bit here. So you're shaping the bone. To shape the bone, you need the action of osteoblasts and osteoclasts. So osteogenesis, so the making of the bone, is carried out by the osteoblasts. They produce osteoid, which is that soft matrix that gives rise to the bone. Now, osteolysis, that means the breakdown of the bone matrix, and that's we call resorption. I'm not saying absorption, it's resorption. This is a very defined term that relates to the action of osteoclasts. So the osteoclasts carry out the resorption. What is the resorption? Is to remove calcium from the bone. So they chew up the bone to remove calcium. So here is an osteoclast. You see that it's derived from a monocyte. So the monocytes fuse together to make these cells osteoclasts, and they are eroding, they are destroying the bone matrix to release calcium. Here you have the osteoblasts. and they are making bone matrix by depositing calcium on the bone.
Professor, I have a question.
Yes,
So the osteoid becomes the mature matrix.
yes, exactly. So the osteoblasts first produce the osteoid that then becomes calcified. So it becomes enriched in hydroxyapatite. So it becomes calcified and leads to the bone matrix. So is the function of osteogenesis to produce osteoblasts? No. Osteogenesis is the function. The osteoblasts are what gives rise to osteogenesis, to make bone. Osteolysis, which is to break about the bone matrix, is carried out by the osteoclasts. Okay, so when is bone start forming in the embryonic life? So it starts around 6 weeks of age in the fetus. So the bone starts forming. That means the cartilage is going to be transformed or into bone. So you have ossification centers that are formed in different parts of the fetus. So a 10-week-old human fetus has some already ossification centers that going to give rise to specific bones in specific areas. So it all depends on this ossification centers. So remember, these ossification centers are where the osteoblasts come in those areas, in the ossification centers, to give rise to bone matrix and start forming the bones. So ossification centers are very important. They are the centers where ossification, where the bones start forming. Okay, so there are two types of ossification. So the intramembranous ossification and the endochondral ossification. So they form bones in different ways, different mechanisms. So the intermembranous ossification, you have first an ossification center that is formed that will make the center, the core of the bone. And then there's more bone being added to the core to form the bone and leads to changes in shape. So this type of intramembranous ossification occurs in the skull, the mandible, and the clavicle. So these bones are formed through intramembranous ossification, where you have first a center, an ossification center being formed, and then you have deposition of bone matrix on this core area. Now, the endochondral ossification is very different. First, you have the hyaline cartilage that someone was talking about that is formed with a certain shape, and then the bone is added to this frame. The bone is being added to fill in the frame. So it has a predetermined shape. So the humerus and the femur are formed through endochondral ossification. So here in the intramembranous ossification, you have a change in shape. Here in the endochondral ossification, you have a frame that is formed. So you have a predetermined shape that then is going to be filled with bone. Okay, so let's look at the intermembranous ossification. So remember that I said that the important unit here is the ossification center. This is the initial center that leads to ossification, to the formation of the bone. So you see here the osteoprogenitor cells, and they are going to be, they're going to give rise to the osteoblasts. And now you have the osteoid being formed by the osteoblasts. And around here is mesenchyma. So no bone here. You have this ossification center that is formed with the osteoblasts and the osteoid being formed. Now, the second step, what happens is you have more osteoid being formed, and you have the osteocytes that are going to be trapped. Around here, still mesenchyma, no bone material here. So here are the osteocytes, and you have osteoid, and here already the calcified bone matrix with the osteocytes trapped in there. Then here, the third step, you have blood vessels invading, and you have the spongy bone containing the red blood, the stem cells, the precursors of blood cells, and you have the osteoids being formed. And then you have compact bone. So this is the third step when you have the blood vessel invasion, and you have the trabecular starting to be made. And then the fourth step, here you have the periosteum with the osteogenic cells, you have compact bone, and you have the trabecular being formed also. So this is the last step of the intramembranous ossification. And you see here, this is already calcified, this dark area already has the calcified bone. Here, this light area is still soft matrix that is produced. It's the osteoid made by the osteoblasts. Here you see the calcified bone with the hydroxyapatite and collagen fibers. And here's just a different staining of these areas. So this is the intramembranous ossification. So there's no cartilage model of frame being formed. So sometimes these ossification centers can be formed in the wrong places, and this leads to heterotopic bone formation. Heterotopic, that means it's placed in the wrong area, that has the wrong location. And you can see here that this bone being formed where it isn't, where it shouldn't be. So it gives a deformed position and deformed shape. And this, you can imagine, can lead to a huge pain because you have bone being deposited, being formed in areas where it should not be. And sometimes these ossification centers are formed within the muscle. And you see here the bone being formed within muscle where it should not be. And this is known as myositis ossification. Myo, this prefix, is always related to muscle. Myositis ossification. This is when you have an ossification center formed within a muscle. And how does this start? Why does this happen? Sometimes we don't know. It could be some chemicals that give rise to this and stimulate the formation of these ossification centers. Okay, now the endochondral ossification. You see here the hyaline cartilage that is formed. So you have this frame, and then you have an ossification center. We call this the primary ossification center that start to be formed, giving rise to the osteoblasts and the osteocytes. And then you have the first medullary cavity being formed. And now you have two ossification centers in the two extremities of the bone. And this is going to give rise to the epiphysis. So here you have the diaphysis and you have the medullary cavity being extended. And then you have the epiphysis and you have the secondary ossification centers. And here, well, you could say that the hyaline cartilage gives rise to the articular cartilage, but some of it does not, right? So it's a remnant of the articular cartilage is the remnant of the hyaline cartilage that is first formed to give rise to one of these endochondral ossification processes. Okay, now here, remember, this is the metaphysis. You see that is where the epiphysis meets the diaphysis. And this is where the epiphyseal plate is located. So the epiphyseal plate is very important because it allows the bone to grow. Once the epiphyseal plate is totally calcified, then the bone can no longer grow. And this area is known as the epiphyseal line. So it becomes a very, very thin remnant of the epiphyseal plate. So you see here the articular cartilage, it's a remnant of the hyaline cartilage, and you see the epiphyseal plate. So here at the epiphyseal plate, there's a lot of activity going on. You have chondrocytes, these cells that can undergo mitosis and give rise to bone cells. So you see here another histological presentation of this process. You see the metaphysis, that's the area here between the epiphysis and the diaphysis. You see here a secondary ossification center and a primary ossification center. So what is the difference between the primary ossification center and the secondary? That is where it is first developed. The primary ossification center is the first one to form within that hyaline model. And then the secondary ossification centers develop in what is going to give rise to the epiphysis. Okay, so how does the bone grow? The bone grows in length. That's known as interstitial growth. Don't confuse it with intramembranous ossification. Now we're talking about how the bone grows. It grows in length, that's interstitial growth, and it grows in diameter, in thickness. That's known as appositional growth. So interstitial and appositional growth, that's how the bone grows. So the interstitial growth depends on the maturation of the epiphyseal plate. So you see here, this is an epiphyseal plate, let's say of a child, where you can see that there's still cartilage present in the bone. So this cartilage gives rise, allows the bone to grow. Once it's totally calcified, then you just see a remnant that is the epiphyseal line. So here you see the epiphyseal plate that has still cartilage, so it's not totally ossified and allows the bone to grow. And then the epiphyseal line, that means that this area in the metaphysis is totally calcified, so there's no more bone growth. So if you look at the metaphysis, that area between the epiphysis and the diaphysis, you can see that there's a lot of chondrocytes. So these chondrocytes have different stages. So there's some that are resting, they're just there latent, waiting for a signal to start growth, to start developing. Then once they are activated, they undergo mitosis. And it's this ability to undergo mitosis that allows for more and more cells to be deposited and for the bone to grow. So the ability of the proliferating cartilage, you see here mitotic figures, right? This is anaphase, for example. So it's the ability of these chondrocytes to undergo mitosis that allows the bones to grow. So you have a reserve cartilage where the chondrocytes are not active, they're not undergoing mitosis. Then you have the proliferating cartilage where these cells are very active, undergoing mitosis. Then they swell in size, they grow in size, and this is the hypertrophic cartilage. And now they're starting to be calcified and transition to osteoblasts that are essential for bone deposition. So you have this transition for interstitial growth that happens at the epiphyseal plate. So the epiphyseal plate has all these stages of chondrocytes that they are not active, undergo mitosis, they grow and then become calcified and give rise to the osteoblasts so that bone deposition initiates. So this is the interstitial growth that allows bones to grow in length. So this hypertrophic cartilage is the stage in which the chondrocytes, once the mitosis stops, they increase in size. So if you compare the size of the chondrocytes here with the size of the chondrocytes here, they're no longer undergoing mitosis, they're just growing in size. Okay, so the interstitial growth allows the bone to grow in length. And the interstitial growth occurs in this direction and in this direction. So this is the epiphyseal plate. So you have that interstitial growth growing in both directions. Okay, so now what about appositional growth? This is where the diameter of the bone increases. So you see here a cross section of the femur. You see an infant where you have the middle is hollow. This is the medullary cavity. And then you have compact bone. And you have the bone, the osteoblasts are actively depositing bone so that the thickness of this area is increasing, and the osteoclasts work inside to increase the diameter of the medullary cavity. So you have the osteoblasts depositing bone and the osteoclasts working inside to increase the medullary cavity. And that's how the diameter of the bone increases. Osteoblasts are depositing bone and the osteoclasts are inside, chewing up and increasing the diameter of the medullary cavity. And this process carried out by the osteoclasts is known as bone resorption. Okay, so this interplay between the osteoblasts and the osteoclasts is very important to shaping the bone. I showed you the shapes of the bones in one of the first slides. And how is it possible to have these bones with these different shapes? So this is known as bone remodeling. So it depends on osteoclasts and osteoblasts. So the osteoclasts will chew up the bone. They're like artists that are modeling the shape of the bone. So it's an interplay between osteoclasts and osteoblasts. Okay, so what can increase the bone density? So keep this in mind that the osteoblasts, the activity of the osteoblasts respond to stress and strain. So this is the Wolff's law, that bone is restructured in response to stress and strain. So one of the good exercises to prevent osteoporosis and to increase bone density are these weight lifting exercises, because that stress applied by the weight will activate the osteoblasts. Now, if you think about the astronauts where there is no gravity, so there's no weight, their body does not have the weight of the body. It's very, very light. There's no gravity. So they have to constantly be doing exercises to increase bone density. So they lose about 1% of bone density per week. That's why it's so important for them to do exercises. in space when there's no gravity. So weight-bearing exercise are the most important exercises to increase bone density. You have other type of exercises, cardiovascular exercises that help the heart and the circulation, but the weightlifting exercises are the ones that increase the density of the bones. So mechanical stress increases the deposition of mineral salts and collagen fibers. Okay, so now we can go a little bit of what modulates, what regulates the growth of the bones. So there's two stages, before puberty and after puberty. Yes, so we need stress. So this stress is not mind stress. It's stress or weight exercise on the bones, weight on the bones, applied onto the bones. So prior to puberty, there are these 4 factors that are important for bone growth. Human growth hormone that is produced by the pituitary gland, insulin growth factor produced by the bone and liver, thyroid hormone, and parathyroid hormone. These are active not only during puberty, also past puberty, after puberty. Thyroid hormone and parathyroid hormone also are active during adulthood. And then insulin produced by the pancreas. So these factors are very, very active before puberty to regulate bone growth. So at puberty, there's a sudden growth. Why? Can you still increase bone density to exercise after the epiphyseal plate has calcified? Yes, because remember, the epiphyseal plate is only to increase the length of the bone, but you still need to increase the density of the bone because there are osteoblasts all over, right? In the periosteum and endosteum. So you need to keep depositing calcium to maintain the strength of the bone. The epiphyseal plate has a role in bone growth. Okay, so at puberty, there's a sudden growth. Why? Because sex hormones are produced. So the ovaries, which are active in biological females, they produce estrogen. What does estrogen do? It causes the epiphyseal plate to close quickly or to close more quickly, so faster. So that's why biological females are usually shorter than biological males. But this is not a rule. This is one of the effects of estrogen. Now the testes, they produce testosterone in biological males. So the epiphyseal plate closes later in biological males because of the effect of the estrogen. Okay, so let's see what the time is. I still can go a little bit just on this. Let's see what's. Okay, so remember that the bone plays a big, big role in maintaining the homeostatic levels of calcium in the blood. So normal concentration of calcium in the blood is 8.7 to 10.4 milligrams per deciliter. And these numbers might change from textbook to textbook, from article to article, but it's within this range. So if blood calcium levels go above 10.4 milligrams, that condition is known as hypercalcemia. That's not good. That means homeostasis has been disrupted. There's too much calcium. What does this lead? To depression of the nervous system and sometimes cardiac arrest. And this is hard for you to understand now, but I will explain later in the next class. If the calcium levels go below 8.7, that also disrupts homeostasis, calcium homeostasis. And that is known as hypocalcemia. Hyper goes above the limit, hypo goes below the limit. And this is hypocalcemia, there's calcium deficiency. That means that nervous system is highly excitable and it can lead to tetany. And I will explain this later. Okay, so this, I think I just got one more slide, which is, what is the role of vitamin D in maintaining calcium homeostasis? So this level of calcium. So you know that vitamin D, the precursor, is 7-dihydrocholesterol that is present in the skin. And with the action of ultraviolet from the sun, it is converted to vitamin D3. It's still a steroid. Vitamin D3 goes to the liver and it is converted to calcidiol. Here it's not still active. So you need this intermediate step between the skin and the kidney. So vitamin D3 is converted to calcidiol, and then in the kidney, it's converted to the active form of vitamin D, which is calcitriol. So why is it that this is so important? Calcitriol is so important to maintain calcium homeostasis. So calcitriol, what it does, it acts at the kidney to prevent excretion of calcium. So if calcium excretion into the urine is decreased, then there's more calcium available to deposit on the bone. It also increases calcium absorption from the digestive tract. So there's more calcium being absorbed from the lumen of the digestive tract. So what calcitriol does is increase the levels of calcium in the blood by reducing excretion through the kidney and by increasing absorption from the digestive tract. So this is the importance of vitamin D. So one question. Would I still have office hours if I email? Yes. Okay, so I will stop here. And now I want to cover some of the exam questions. So we go now